justifies the publicity, so to say. But we are recording the session, and so later on it will become available. As you can see, I'm not Vlad Rashkovan, who was supposed to moderate the session. He unfortunately could not make it last minute due to health issues. So we have as far as I'm concerned, an excellent panel composed of three mighty ladies from different parts of the world, but all of whom have a great deal of experience in resilience and economic recovery of different conflict contexts and countries. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Oleksandra Betliy, who has over 20 years of experience in the macroeconomic field. She's a renowned expert in the issues of economic policy, fiscal, social, and macroeconomics in Ukraine, and serves as the leading economist at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. It's quite a name. Welcome, Oleksandra. We also have Olena Pavlenko, who is the president of DiXi Group. That is the energy think tank. I would say leading energy think tank in Ukraine. Olena is also internationally recognized for her expertise. She is on the board of the Extractive Industries Initiative, civil society representative there, as well as she has served as the chair of the Publish What You Pay, which is an international group in 2020, 2022. And her expertise knows no boundaries, really, given the reach that she has had. And last but definitely not least, we have Hela Cheikhrouhou, who is a former Minister of Energy for Tunisia, but also former Regional Vice President for Middle East, Central Asia, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Pakistan at the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group, as well as former CEO of the Green Climate Fund. So I think we are in very good hands to talk about the conflict and recovery and the solutions to it. And with that, I would like to start to lay out the premise for today's conversation and discussion. Apologies, my name is Eka. I'm an advisor with the Open Society Foundation's Europe team, and I work on Ukraine as part of my portfolio. So the conversation that we wanted to frame today is around the issues of where are we from the perspective of economic recovery of Ukraine, as opposed to where we started 4 years ago when the invasion happened, and external shocks that Ukraine experienced initially, as opposed to external shocks that Ukraine is experiencing now, as well as the external shocks that other countries around the world have experienced. In that sense, we really want to showcase what that means. Do we talk about recovery from these external shocks, or do we move to converse about the permanency of the status quo, right? And how do we create systems, whether it's the fiscal, governance, other types of infrastructure, policies and systems that can support the existing economy of a given country. Obviously, we have a lot of case study from Ukraine, but we are also looking forward to hear case studies from other parts of the world. So in that sense, we have about hour and 15 minutes for this session. I will be framing the conversation as questions and answers, and then I'll be bringing the audience participation into the conversation. So I wanted to start with you, Oleksandra, and really just ask a question about the assumptions of stability, fiscal policy, and growth of Ukraine, and whether the assumptions that you had before the invasion proved misleading once the actual invasion took place and once the shock became structural, right, in economic terms.
Yeah, hi everybody. First, I would like to state that indeed the war is already more than 12 years, and as a result, Ukraine received the first shock 12 years ago. So Russia annexed Crimea as well as started occupation of part of the territory. And 4 years ago, the situation worsened because it was kind of full-scale invasion. So currently what we have in Ukraine is no safe place because missiles and drones are all over Ukraine, and this is our new reality. First, especially when full-scale invasion started, the biggest kind of word for describing economic reality in Ukraine was uncertainty. Gradually, it became I think the biggest word in all IMF reports as well, especially when we talk about global economic outlook. I mean, like already for several years, we have this uncertainty as a key word. And this is something that changed, I mean, like during the years. Just because, I mean, like currently we are all working on uncertainty and we don't really talk about anymore about equilibriums. So previously we did, I mean, like talk about equilibrium economic situation, equilibrium exchange rate, equilibrium something else. But now we are not talking about this just because we have new reality. And this relates to Ukraine and many actually countries in the world. And actually that's what we see even in the reports of IMF. So IMF doesn't produce optimistic scenarios anymore, but what we have is kind of baseline scenario, detrimental one and severe one. Yeah, I mean, like I would call it like this. So currently, again, what we have with the war in the Middle East, that actually the biggest topic is which discussed during spring meeting with the IMF groups is kind of what is the impact of this war for global economy, because this is the biggest war, I mean, like for many years already. And the IMF compares this with the crisis of 70s and says that the most important thing is that inflation doesn't go to spiral, because this will be, again, we are not talking about equilibrium, but we are talking about uncertainty and new reality of behaving. And this is something that Ukraine lives in, I mean, like already for many years. And this is something that we just have to take into account, that before that, when we were talking about assumptions, usually we would look mostly for some indicators. That to GDP ratio, exchange rate, appreciation, I mean, like pressure, current account to balance of payment problems, etc., etc. So it was like more macroeconomic side. We would discuss, I mean, like something like that. Currently, what Ukrainian case showed that actually it's not only about assumptions, like about indicators, but what is more important is about institutions. It's about resilience of institutions, and it's about adaptivity and flexibility. Because previously we would think that probably strong institutions are those who are strong, so I'm more like traditional and we just have to have something like that. Currently we are saying that institutions in such a new environment of uncertainty, it's something that we really need to have institutions adaptive. They should be flexible. They have to also work together. So when we talk about institutions overall and stakeholders overall, we need really government of Ukraine, international partners, business, civil society, population of Ukraine work together in coordination. And as a result, we will have better actually chances to survive and remain resilient. And this is kind of really a formula for resilience of Ukraine, and that's somebody can learn from. It's kind of that government is acting, government is adaptive and also flexible. We do have a strong support of international partners, but again, just to remember what happened 4 years ago, government was there, and then assistance came. So if government would fail, then we will not receive, I mean, like all international assistance that we have. Therefore, strong government is something that we really need to have. Also, strong population. Even though many Ukrainians had to leave the country to look for security, many people stayed in Ukraine. We are continuing working, we have our families there, and therefore we have jobs because business also remained in Ukraine, and the business is adapting, and we have so many risks again, but this is about new reality. But also just to mention, when we talk about recovery is going on now. So Russia damages infrastructure, Russia damages health facilities, educational facilities. The government tries to restore this. Recently, I mean, like here, being in Washington, I've heard, why do you restore something? Because I mean, like it will be damaged again. But the clear answer is because people are there. And people to stay in Ukraine, we have to have access to education, we have to have access to healthcare, and we have to actually, I mean, like, just continue our normal lives. So yeah, we go to cafes, we go to the theaters in Kiev, and not only Kiev are booked, overbooked actually, just because you have to continue live. And that's, I mean, like so the government has to do it. And here we have really great help of, for example, of our donors, World Bank, European Investment Bank, which actually do support all this recovery and reconstruction, which is really important. And also one key message from about assumptions and about what we have is after 2008, when we had global financial and economic crisis, suddenly all institutions, especially IFIs, opened eyes and says, oh, financial markets are important. Before that, we traditionally didn't look at financial markets so much. IMF got just really big bunch of new tools, I mean, like how to early warning exercises, etc., I mean, like to react to the financial market risks. So currently what we see from our work, security and defense is really important for the country, for economic situation in the country. We need air defense, we need to be strong in military terms, and then actually it impacts really our economy. It's about business continue working, it's about energy infrastructure continue working, logistics works, and others. And as a result, I mean, like all the security issue, all these defense issues is something that actually frames economy now. And as a result, we just have to take into account that unfortunately the war is still with us. Unfortunately, we think that it will be still with us, I mean, like for some years. And this is something where assumptions were on at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Each macroeconomic forecast of IMF during this recent 4 years, we're assuming that the war will end next year. And this actually doesn't provide us with a good intention just to make right policies sometimes, just because if you expect that next year the war will not be there, then sometimes you are making not the right set of decisions.
For starting us off with a great sort of explanation of the assumptions versus the reality. I wanted to bring in Olena, if you don't mind, to talk about the specifics of the infrastructure aspect of the energy and the assumptions that were behind how the energy sector had been operating and what does the resilience what has the resilience meant in sort of responding to the attacks, because in some ways energy sector is not a byproduct damage of what's happening of the war, right? In Ukraine, it's a direct attacks. It's a sort of a target of the missiles and the damage that is being sort of brought to Ukraine. So I wanted to ask if you could comment on how were the systems designed, if they were, to endure the damage, and what has the resilience meant in it? Thank you.
And yeah, if I may talk from the IFIs perspective, right, and our cooperation in energy sector with the IFIs. So maybe just to start from saying that energy sector was one of the targets for the war, and Russia attacked energy sector specifically right from the beginning. Now we have more than 24 billion damages assessment, and losses it's almost 4 times more, 88 billion. And I believe much more will be needed in order to restore the system in a more greener and better way. Now about what worked, what didn't work, specifically taking into account the energy sector. I think long-term planning doesn't work anymore. So when you have a project which you design for 5-7 years, and I'm saying about not from the transmission system operator, I'm saying from the IFI perspective. who wants to work with the country, it might not work. You have to be ready to change the project quite often. You have to be ready to adapt to the situation on the ground. You have to be ready to sometimes even change your procedures in order to be efficient and impactful on the ground for the country. Second is the regulations and complicated regulations, which usually takes too much time to make a decision. In case of Ukraine, you can wait for some project which can be adopted, and then the situation is changed to the extent when this project in exact design might not be needed anymore. So you have to come back again and change everything again. So there's simplification of procedures, regulations for decision making, how to work with the country. And specifically, actually, in energy sector as well, it should be revised. And just as an example, I have found the first application from France to the World Bank to get money. This is a letter from the ambassador to the World Bank asking for 500 million. In that case, in our money, it would be like $7 billion to support with the first project. So now it's a bit more than just a letter if you want to get some money from the IFIs. Then I think what could be done else is less top-down approach, more horizontal approach to work with the countries. Because in case of Ukraine and many other countries, we can learn from each other so much. Ukraine can share lessons learned with other countries, but also other countries can share lessons learned with Ukraine. Those countries who, let's say, Japan, who had the issue with Fukushima, and they had to deal with a lot of environmental issues, they can share a lot with us. The same, we can explain how to keep the system resilient, how to keep the energy system resilient with those countries who are basically we are doing this with Middle East countries now. So our energy specialists are going there and they discuss how to increase the resilience of the electricity sector of some of the Middle East countries. Another element I would say is there is no one advice for all. So you cannot take one approach and then just multiply it in all countries without changes. There always will be some specifics, some local specifics, which you have to take into account. Otherwise, the project won't move forward. And again, we will come back to the regulations, the IFIs, they kind of should be ready to adjust to the local situation. Moreover, I would always advocate that they should work with the locals. To better understand what is happening on the ground. And that also brings us to the topic that civil society organizations should be better integrated into the consultations process with IFIs and the local projects implementation. So not only environmental, social, but many other aspects can be taken into account. Thank you.
Olena, I wanted to move to Mrs. Cheikhrouhou. Hela, and then kind of first pick up on the point that Oleksandra made around the assumptions of the international financial institutions, but also link that to what Olena was talking about in the context of the, how IFIs work with specific countries. And, I think that we all know that no one expected Ukraine to last as long as it has lasted from the, the projections perspective, not just sort of the macroeconomics, but also the stability, right, in many, many different ways internally. And my question, I guess, is that this is not the first country to have gone through such external shocks. And with your experience, what would be really very useful is to kind of get your commentary on where do the international institutions might have operated under outdated assumptions of how these external shocks impact or what could be done to overcome them.
So first of all, I think so far what Oleksandra and Olena have shared is fascinating and very, I subscribe to it all. So after 23 years in the world of international financial institutions, what I can say is, let's remember that these have a public sector driven governance. They are owned by either one or multiple governments. And the way they operate as bureaucracies is driven by the prudence and the search for zero mistakes. Therefore, we may end up completely missing the target of zero mistakes because of the prudence of the approach, by trying to fulfill all the requirements to eliminate all the risks. In other words, and this is something, I discussed previously with one significant shareholder, which is, if you truly want to be what was described, adaptive, flexible, agile, introduce willingness to question the previous ways of doing business and simplify procedures, then it sort of requires a change in the modality of governance of the international financial institution, because the zero risk does not exist when you are operating in a fragile and volatile environment. And the zero risk of reputational risk, financial risk, environmental risk, or social risk is not possible. So that's by trying to be, that's the tension at the heart of it. That's the tension. Because if the whole structure, from the analyst to the manager to the shareholders, do not want ever to see a headline in a journal that some operation was mishandled, then you want to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And by the time you finish re-editing for the 10th time a brief, then it's obsolete, or let alone change a policy or a procedure. So I think that's the journey of reform that international financial institutions have repeatedly been on. And by now, including by some of the initiatives that the G20 and others have been asking for the DFIs to reform themselves, you can't have everything. So if the shareholders want the DFIs to be much more adaptive, agile, responsive, risk takers, flexible, there has to be tolerance for the unexpected in the outcome of the work. And one of the positives, if I look at the latest multilateral development banks I worked on, which is the World Bank Group, at least the intention of this evolution of the World Bank Group is to be more responsive to the client, more outward looking rather than always inward looking, more sitting to collaborate with others, not to tell others, that horizontal approach, to be more able to be that knowledge broker as opposed to be the know-it-all, which is impossible to be. So the intention is there, but I would really place a lot on, if that's the case, then the shareholders have to be able to signal that because when I joined from Citigroup to the World Bank back in the day, my IMF colleague told me, "You are a bureaucrat today." And I'm like, "What? No, I'm a banker." No, it's a bureaucracy. So once you realize that GFIs are bureaucracies, then you internalize it. It's the same here about, why do we make scenarios that are unrealistic? There was a very robust discussion in 2023 that my team had with other colleagues within the World Bank Group. Why should we do a country climate and development report for the Palestinian territories if the Palestinians do not control their territories? The machine was, we have to do it anyway, and we will do. And why don't we put realistic scenarios if they can't control what happens to their land? So in other words, people in multilateral organizations that are owned by governments, where the staff is not political but the governance is political, have sometimes to do things that ignore the elephant in the room, which does not lead to the smartest result of the analysis.
Thank you so much for also very candid explanations. And I wanted to push you a little bit on some of these points, if I may, and ask you very pragmatically, how do you finance resilience? And what does it mean for the international financial institution, any given financial institution, to finance resilience on the ground within the country context?
Of course, different people have a different definition of resilience, but I will take the assumption that it is what we heard from Oleksandra and Olena, which is that you do not assume that fragility, conflict, uncertainty will disappear overnight, and you have to make everything work in a way that life goes on. Life has to go on, and therefore you factor in modalities, institutions, financial structures that allow for repeated reconstruction, that allow for cost-effective reconstruction, that allow for not the most expensive reconstruction materials on earth, but solutions to reuse the products from what was destroyed by conflict. So that pragmatism and that non-business as usual is a bit foreign to the regular business as usual of 70 plus years old multilateral and bilateral development finance institutions. And that's where, again, there has to be the ability to change the way we define the scope of the project. So in my case, and we have here one of my colleagues who visited with me several of the fragile and conflict-affected countries in the Middle East and South Central Asia when I was responsible for that. We were in the IFC, so our purpose was to finance private sector operators who would do investments in fragility in those countries. And we found that with hard work and good intention, but also it takes a lot longer than it should, because we have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But we have to map out all the universe of private sector operators that are present in the fragile country and that have established themselves as successful diaspora businesses outside of the country, because the same way that remittances are a lifeline for developing countries, including in fragility, the same way diaspora successful businesses are very well aligned with the development finance institutions and international financial institutions in the desire to help life go on and reconstruction happen and day-to-day life work and jobs to be created, etc. So, you know, they are like, if you run with us, we will run with you. We don't need to wait for the perfect project. Just give us your work with us. So there are many, many successful examples we were able to close in IFC in the Middle East and Central Asia region in the last 4.5 years, where we were able, for instance, in times of extraordinary volatility, in this case, not really proper conflict, but fiscal and monetary huge volatilities in Pakistan and in Turkey, when some of, like, for instance, Pakistan, several IFIs stopped doing anything with them, but we went on with some of the lower risk instruments like trade finance, but was crucial because with the crisis of lack of hard currency, they couldn't otherwise get some of the essential goods and services. Similarly, as Iraq or Yemen, were starting to try to pick up the pieces and rebuild sometimes elsewhere, because assets, some of them were seized or destroyed, to meet the needs for education, as you were mentioning, for infrastructure, for housing. So again, we map out, we look for credible counterparts, whether local or from the region. We worked with, we mapped out some of those who were able, despite displacement, to successfully establish themselves, whether in other Middle Eastern countries or in Europe or in North America, and are interested to build. So we did some for food security in Yemen. We did the same, some south-south, some north-south investments in Iraq, in the food security, in the education and health, a teaching hospital in Yemen. And that requires, though, teams that are willing to put aside the fear for their career that they will be branded fragile country investment officers or task team leaders, and see the opportunity to make sure you are active in countries where the dollar we give is the life or death, as opposed to a nice to have in a more stable environment. And the reality is we found a lot of enthusiasm when we motivated and accompanied the team and gave them the assurances at all the levels of management that we will take it and we will present it to the board and we will articulate how we mitigated the unavoidable multitudes of risks. And there will always be residual risk. Risk zero cannot be compatible with a volatile and fragile environment.
Thank you so much for this. But also bringing in the examples, because I think one of the things that we are often lacking is, like Olena mentioned earlier, horizontal exchanges, but also exchanges in the context of resilience, but also projects, right? Individual, very specific, practical projects that has worked in other conflict regions. And I think from the Ukraine perspective, we are starting to see how Ukraine's experience can be applicable to the outside world as well. So really exploring that as an opportunity. But I wanted to come to Oleksandra and ask you, going back to the infrastructure resilience, if you could describe how the infrastructure resilience, particularly in the energy sector, has translated into the macroeconomic stability and resilience for Ukraine.
Yeah, indeed. When we talk about resilience in Ukraine, it's not really about, like what is going on in the energy sector, transport sector, etc., but how they actually enable business to continue working, how they enable population to continue living in the country and developing actually. And this is something that actually is really important just to understand. So when we talk about energy, for example, resilience, we, like, unfortunately, as Olena said, we have lost, like some part of generation, etc. The biggest hit was done in January this year, when there was -20 on the streets, but we didn't have heating and electricity access. And indeed, we do at the area business tendency survey, and as a result, actually danger to work and access to electricity are usually to those that are impediments or obstacles for companies to continue working. It's not even for development, it's just for operation. And as a result, it does impact, and that's what we saw actually in the end of last year. The real GDP in last year increased only by 1.8%, even though everybody was expecting more than 2%. Just because in the fourth quarter of the year, there was a huge hit on energy sector. And as a result, business didn't have access to electricity. But the situation was worse even this the year in the first quarter, especially in January and February. As a result, what happened is that real GDP declined for the first time during the full-scale invasion, that it's, according to our estimates, it's -0.6%. It's not a big decline, but we just have to take into account from which base we are declining. Like it's already a low base and we're still declining. And one of the reasons actually was that we didn't have, access, our companies didn't have access to electricity. And here we return to the question of adaptivity and flexibility, because still during full-scale invasion, many companies, large companies, they invested in renewables, then they invested in cogeneration of electricity and in some other kind of investments which increased their energy independence. Partially they did it because they had money, partially there were state government programs to support this, but also there was a kind of a mutual decision of several banks when they organized kind of a pool for credit in the business and provided like cheaper credit. Or we also received, some of the banks received the risk in instruments from EBRD or European Investment Bank, which also helped the companies to receive cheaper credit actually and to invest in this. But not all companies did it. So for small companies, it's really like full generators, which helped. So we're not talking about sustainability at the moment. We're talking really about resilience, that companies just have to work. Why it's important? Because people have to have jobs. If business is there, then people have jobs, people can live, so they can survive. We avoiding deeper poverty because according to World Bank, we already have a poverty above 30%. And also what it means that we do receive taxes to our budget. And currently, I mean, like when we talk about our budget, starting 2023, half of our budget is financed by international support, mostly loans. That's why actually our debt to GDP ratio increased from 50% before full-scale invasion to 100% currently. So, but it also helped that actually we had a low rate, I mean, like before full-scale invasion because of good governance programs. But at the same time, there is kind of a need to prioritize. The biggest priority for Ukraine is defense, and as a result, defense and security financing is 30% of our GDP or half of our budget. And therefore, I mean, like without international support, indeed, we will not survive. And this is about, again, resilience here. When we talk about also infrastructural resilience, it's about transport as well. So in 2022, first we had a so-called grain corridor, which was controlled by Russia. So they played a lot with the inspectors. So sometimes they would block it, sometimes they will allow grain to go through. Starting September 2023, we have so-called Ukrainian Sea Corridor, which is actually important for our iron ore expertise as well as grain expertise and other agricultural products expertise. So this again, I mean, like logistics is really important. Unfortunately, transferring goods through seaports is much more expensive now because of high cost of insurances. And unfortunately, we don't have any support, I mean, like from international partners or the government program because of lack of the money to help our companies to finance these insurances. As a result, one of the metallurgical companies said that, for example, for them to export their products to European Union through the seaports costs more than from Brazil to European Union country. And you can, I mean, like, you know, the difference, I mean, like in the kilometers, but just because of its higher insurances, it's higher cost because not everybody is ready to go to Ukrainian ports, just because Russia also actually bombs seaports all the time. Russia also bombs the ships. And as a result, this is kind of a dangerous situation there. Therefore, transport as well, I mean, like logistics is really important. And what Russia also started doing this year more than it did before, it's hitting by missiles and drones of our railway infrastructure, and including freight transportation, but also passenger transportation. We have already several casualties when people were killed, just, I mean, like being in the passenger trains. And this is also that, why I'm saying is that it's again that what I mentioned before, security is really important, and air defense and our campaign for Close the Sky is really important just for economy to go through. And therefore we really need more air defense for our seaports, for our cities, for, I mean, like infrastructure, but also infrastructure is now protected. I mean, like there are projects to protect our infrastructure by physical kind of cell tests, etc. And that's something that this is innovation of Ukraine, I mean, like how to do it. And another innovation of Ukraine is where government was spending money is building more bomb cell tests, because schools can operate in Ukraine only if we have bomb cell tests. And also in some localities, we have underground schools. So this is something that we will never imagine that we will have in such a century, I mean, like in our cities. But this is something that we really need for our children to go to schools. And this is about, again, future of Ukraine, about that we will have labor market, we will have people living in the country and also working in the country.
Much, Oleksandra, but also for bringing a human element to it as well. I did hear you speak about the bomb shelter schools actually in more details earlier this morning, and I think it was quite for those that have children can imagine that the idea of the little people going to be studying in the shelters, that's definitely unimaginable at a human level, and thank you for highlighting that as well. You know, one of the criticisms that we get working in the Ukraine context is that Ukraine is a special case. In fact, Olena and myself were in a meeting yesterday where we also were told that things that were done for Ukraine would never be done for other places. And actually that was in the context of Olena in particular trying to push certain policies that were applied to Ukraine to also be utilized for other jurisdictions because those are favorable for the general policy making, whether it's for good governance or transparency issues or whatnot. And it was interesting to hear that from an official person to say that, well, even if that was done for Ukraine, it will not be possible for other contexts. And so it makes me think whether, the economic recovery that we so much want for Ukraine and resilience as well, is it something innate in Ukraine? Is it something internal, or it's really externally driven? Because Europe, the world, needs Ukraine, and therefore all of the support that Ukraine gets allows Ukraine, in fact, to stay on the map and then to basically live through what is unimaginable to live through. Olena, the question is to you. Thank you. And apologies, after this, I'm going to open up for questions and answers. I'm enjoying this conversation, so I have lots of more questions to keep going, but I would very much like everyone else to think of the questions, and I'll come to you after Olena. Thank you.
Thank you for a few more seconds to think how to answer. So I would say that, yes, a lot of procedures that applied for Ukraine now, you will find the resistance if you negotiate to apply them broadly with others, and you hear that a lot. But it's also a lessons learned, right? Which then can be implemented properly at the global scale. So if something which worked for Ukraine, and let's say the World Bank has applied some specific cooperation instruments for some stakeholders, and it works, why not to scale it up? Why not to implement it at the global World Bank activities? It also works vice versa. If Ukraine learned a lot how to adapt to the international financial institutions rules, and how to be very fast with following all the application process, all the negotiations. So we also can teach how to better adapt to such environment, let's say. So my message would be that what is happening now in Ukraine and all the assistance which is providing to Ukraine from the donors, IFIs, countries, someone, I don't know who, but someone can learn, study what works, and then think we can actually discuss how to implement it at the World Bank group level, or I don't know, at the UN level and other stuff. So it's just the start of the journey. we're happy to contribute. We probably will need more discussions like that. We can talk on energy sector, what worked, what didn't work, how the, I don't know, World Bank being very hesitant to support gas sector at all, started to support cogeneration unit supply because otherwise we would not have heat at all in Ukraine. Nuclear, thanks God, nuclear is now in the agenda of the development institutions. But again, talking about the situation with heat supply, with generation, maybe in the short run, the IFIs can do the same assumptions which they did for Ukraine, for other countries. Then if we talk about I don't know, building value chains, which Ukraine is going to do now for the net zero technologies, manufacturing. Not Ukraine is not doing that. It's just civil society advocating that. But so helping the country within the value chain to think how to build it and increase its capacity within its border. Also something which IFIs can take from our case for other countries.
Yeah, if I may, just probably a bit different angle as well, but it's Ukraine is kind of a lab, yeah, for testing some of her hypotheses, unfortunately, and therefore, yeah, I mean, like, good lessons learned should be done, and we have, what Olena said, actually, there are lots of things that somebody can learn from us, but also, I mean, like, another angle is that, and we talked about this before, but I think that it's again. Ukraine is a good case to show why reforms matter and why reforms that actually are supported by IMF for many years or World Bank for many years, etc., they pay off. Because difficult reforms which we have done, I mean, like after 2014, for example, and 2015, 2018 mostly, I mean, like pay off now, I mean, like during full-scale invasion. So, for example, banking sector reform. This is the first crisis, actually, economic crisis that we had when banking sector works and still, I mean, like provides credits. I mean, like it's stable, people trust. Why? Because there was a difficult reform done in 2015, 2016. And then digitalization matter. And this is something, again, to be learned from Ukraine, that digitalization, public services, and I mean, like digital provision of public services, etc., also pay off because during full-scale invasion, actually, it helped, I mean, like to provide even assistance to people to register as IDPs or unemployed or something like that, and therefore it's kind of something also to be learned. And then, I mean, actually, this is an example, I mean, like how to show even other countries, I mean, like that, guys, you have to do here and here, and actually it will pay you. Even if there is no big conflict or there is no war, but actually you're becoming stronger. Because again, Ukrainian case, it's about strong institutions. But indeed, I mean, like starting in 2022, I remember we were advocating for IMF, for example, provide programs also to countries which are in war. And we were advocating not only for Ukraine, we were really advocating changes of policies, not to have something particular decision for Ukraine, but actually for such countries as we are.
Surcharges.
Yeah, surcharges as well, and etc. I mean, like, so it's important that just to remember that sometimes it just helps to change the policy in IFIs. It takes year, I mean, like long time. I understand the risks, but I mean, like, I really appreciate that it's moving. And also, for example, when we talk about World Bank, some people say that, for example, World Bank has particular attitude to us on public procurement, etc. But we had Prozoro, so it's kind of a big reform that actually received. Prozoro system, it's the electronic public procurement system, which is still, I mean, like not excellent, but it's much better than we had before. It received World Award for a kind of public procurement system. And now World Bank actually is using Prozoro with some amendments, I mean, like just for public procurements, but it's again that it's not, I wouldn't say that it's really special case of Ukraine, but it's actually that we did something in order to have this. But again, this kind of lessons learned and sharing the experience is really needed. And we will win from some experiences, yeah, as Olena said, and somebody else can learn from us. And this is something that we really need to remember.
Thank you so much. We could possibly go on and on because the conversation is very important, but also I think these are the conversations that's gonna define the economy of the future in general. And it's the economy of future, not just in the context of Ukraine, but the economy of future within specific jurisdictions, regions, or worldwide. And you mentioned earlier the global forecasting as well. We heard yesterday that all of the projections included lots of vulnerabilities into them, lots of unpredictabilities. So I think that a lot of these conversations indeed are applicable to that. So I'm going to open up for questions. Please do say your name and the institution, and then straight to the question.
Hi, my name is Hela. I'm with Smart Couple Associates, does government affairs and advocacy. And I've done a lot in Ukraine space, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine. So my question for you is, I'm very curious to hear more about the relationship between regulation and adaptability, and what levels of regulation can help adaptability versus hinder it. And are you seeing this on like a government level? Is it on like the level of the IFIs? Is it like, I'm just curious to hear more about that. Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Rebecca Albescu, also with Smart Trouble Associates here. My question is so in that region, I mean, corruption is everywhere, right? But the thing is that corruption can be quite a hindrance to any country's development, and especially in a state that Ukraine is like constantly just fighting multiple battles on multiple fronts, both physical and metaphysical. What are some strategies that you all have seen work during that reconstruction process to mitigate that and make sure that the projects and that the funds that are going into the right people's hands and going to the people and not necessarily isolating into a few pockets?
Thank you. Equally excellent. It's the third question, and then we will go to the answers, and then we'll do the other round.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, I'm Kate Stokesbury. I'm with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And I was wondering, as you look to the Ukraine Recovery Conference this summer, what you see as the top priorities for international stakeholders to be focusing on, what is helpful also in the road up to the conference to be discussing and socializing here in Washington. And I'm especially interested in your thoughts on like civilian protection as part of resilience. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Apologies for running around, but my colleague left the room, so I had to multitask. All right. No worries.
Running around.
So could I ask the panelists that you pick and choose which question you would like to answer? You can also try to answer all of them at once, or just pick and choose. But I would very much like to have answers to all of the questions. So if we don't answer the questions, then I'm going to come back to you. So shall we start with, please, you?
Maybe on the point of corruption, what is most helpful for that is to have a judiciary that is independent and well-staffed enough with the ability to act swiftly and fairly. So the point then is how to make sure the independent judiciary is one element within a country that is fragile, volatile, etc., that does continue to get attention and funding, etc., in order for it to work, because then that can be very helpful, especially if we are trying to simplify and make the flow of funds happen with post-checking and avoiding, because time is of the essence. That could be my thought on that. And I may come back later.
So on regulation, I love this question. Thank you. I can give an example from the energy sector. When the full-scale invasion started, there was a huge need in bringing a lot of additional equipment to Ukraine. And despite government tried to somehow centralize this process, it just didn't work at all. So at some moments, the government just said, okay, cities, municipalities, whatever you can get, please get. So the role of the government was just to simplify as much as possible the possibility to go through custom and the logistics. And it happened. So the regulator the government actually simplified the possibility to bring some equipment, which is mostly it was connected to the renewables, batteries. You could bring batteries without VAT, for example. You can You can bring with some other equipment. Then generators. I don't remember whether they removed some taxes, but definitely there was yes. Okay, definitely there was a simple way to import such equipment. So everyone could get the equipment if you can find someone in Poland who can buy you and bring it. If you have access to the internet and know how to buy it in Netherlands, you can buy batteries, inverters, you can do something in your flat. So people kind of started to organize themselves, and it helped a lot. Simultaneously, the energy regulator started to think how to deal with the installment of additional generation capacity or something around any critical infrastructure. So they simplified procedures to connect to the grid, simplified procedure to start some new renewables projects. Again, it's kind of speed up the process of many small but very important projects on the local level, at the level of municipalities. Nevertheless, there is still, if you look now from the 4 years perspectives, there is still a lot to be done because despite simplification, despite all that regulations that has been done, we still have issues, especially with the connecting to the grid and connecting to pipelines. If we're talking about gas sector, there were a lot of cases, and journalists did there is a journalist there, a great investigation. The municipality has found the cogeneration unit, brought it to Ukraine, but then it took like 6 months to connect it, or they just could not connect it. It was just sitting there, and despite the cold winters, they could not use that. So still a lot to be done. To answer your question, whether this is a legislative level, regulatory level, I would say rather regulatory level, much more than the legislative. But legislative also is super important. So when we talk about, again, changing something on the long run, as a lessons learned, you have to talk to the parliament, you have to advocate the changes. And in our case, now we also have parliament on our side with such simplifications. Then on corruption, got the question. Yeah.
To make sure that funds and
the digitalization, as I said, works very much. Oleksandra mentioned our public procurement system, which most of the state companies, local municipalities also have to use in order to procure some stuff. It helps to bring more transparency to the process. We also advocate a lot digitalization into decision-making process and also administrative procedures. This is where you can have the faster process of decision-making, and if, for example, permitting, it definitely demands such a digitalization elements to avoid corruption, basically, right? Especially in energy sector. Then I would say more reporting helps. And we talk about the corporate level, we talk about the government level. When you have the situation like Ukraine and you are in a war, this is a super complicated task because a lot of data is closed. And the reason is always security measures. But even there, we have a very complicated discussion with the government because sometimes the data is closed not because of security, but because of other possible reasons. And so what we advocate for, and now we also see some progress, is that there should be criteria for the assessment what does bring the risks and security risks, what doesn't. And if you have such a matrix in place, you basically can objectively assess every data set and close what is really important and can bring some threats and keep open what is doesn't have any issues. And it's also very important not only in terms of the anti-corruption perspectives, but also in terms of the business environment, because if we want to have investments in Ukraine, but if we close data, business, foreign investors, or everyone who would like to explore the Ukrainian perspectives first, they just cannot get the right understanding what is happening in the country. So this is, I would say, the two biggest elements: transparent digitalization, reporting, data accessibility, which work, but it demands also a very good and tailored approach to the dealing with the information. Just to add, we did found a lot of cases when Russia used the closeness of data for misinformation, right? Mm-hmm. So disinformation. I'm sorry. For example, there was a huge disinformation campaign saying that in the energy sector that Ukraine, because we have outages, that this is not because we have damages in the energy infrastructure, that's because Ukraine sells electricity abroad, which is pure like a lie, but still some people believed in that. So it's super important to keep everything open, but with this security element in mind. And the third one is on URC. I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time. Mm-hmm. Ukraine Recovery Conference will be in June. As far as we know, there still will be these 5 dimensions which are every year. And you were asking about the energy or protection. As far as I know, this element on it should be there as always. The pillar on human development, right? It will be there.
Yeah, just to start from the end, then indeed, actually, usually we had 4 pillars like human capital, business, local dimension, and European integration. This year, the defense finally becomes the 5th panel. Why it's important, again, as I said, I mean, like security and defense really defines everything in the country at the moment. And also Ukraine is one of the key players now in miltech, especially when we talk about drone production, innovation, etc. And therefore, we are a really important player there. Last year, defense was on workshops, different groups, etc., but it wasn't kind of a separate dimension. Now it's really indeed is. What I like during URC when we talk about all these different dimensions is usually that we are sitting in our dimension and we are not really listening what is going on in other dimension. Because, for example, business goes to business dimension and they never listen to local communities, and local communities do not go to listen what are the actually what business actually needs. I mean, like from local communities and working at the local level. And that's something that I really would like to have this kind of interchanges, I mean, like between different groups, because otherwise we're just really going where we are already working and we don't listen the pains and challenges of the other groups. But it will not be solved like this year probably, but we'll see how it goes. But indeed, all dimensions are really needed because we need to develop human capital and we need have everything for people in Ukraine and also for Ukrainians to return. And one of the groups of people that we rarely talk is also Ukrainians who are still on temporarily occupied territories. Because usually we are talking about people who left to Europe, for example, United States, whatever, but we don't talk about those people. And we will have to have special programs for these people because we still have many Ukrainians there who are Ukrainians and who are pro-Ukrainian, but they just don't have really good programs to return to Ukraine and actually to receive housing, etc. And that's where housing becomes really important because in Ukraine, what we are lacking is social housing. We've never had it. And as a result, there are now programs how to build it, how to renovate something to have the social housing because we have 4 million Ukrainians as IDPs. It's internally displaced people. Then we have to bring some more people from temporarily occupied territories from Europe. And therefore, this is the biggest challenge I think that we will face, this housing issue. When we talk about returning to corruption, I agree fully with Olena that she said about transparency and digitalization. But one thing is that we still, even with that much of the data was closed, we still have more open data than many other countries. So, for example, we do have still open data for all transactions of the government and local communities. I can look today what my grandmother paid, my community paid yesterday. I can look today what actually the government paid yesterday. Each transaction, each amount of money, except for those which relate to security and defense, those are closed. But all others are open. So I can go there. That's what actually our vibrant civil society is doing. And we have really strong anti-corruption civil society that looks at this data, they look at Prozoro, and that's why sometimes we have in media so many open cases, not just because we have more corruption than any other country, but actually we have better possibility and we are better equipped to look for this. Also, what is important when we talk about recovery and reconstruction, we just we have a project financed by European Union on watchdogging, on previously on recovery and reconstruction, currently on public investment management, but it's again implementation of the projects which relate to construction, recovery, etc. So we do some granting there, and local communities, local civil society organizations actually go and they look how the reconstruction is done. They analyze why one or another project was financed, how this decision was made, and then we actually do an analysis and then talk to the ministries what kind of policies will be changed. But again, when we talk about all this issue, our civil society has really zero tolerance to corruption, and therefore we talk a lot about it. And also what Ukraine did, and I agree fully that we need still judicial reform, we need still law prosecution reform, but what Ukraine has already, because of push from different international organizations, this anti-corruption architecture. Therefore, we have National Anti-Corruption Bureau, we have other organizations like Special Prosecution Office. So they have started doing the job. So that's why we actually hear all these really big cases already now, just because they are working. And this is something I think that will also help because this is kind of punishment. But at the same time, Ukraine with transparency, digitalization, this is prevention. And prevention is sometimes even more important, as I think, than actually punishment, because you have to just prevent corruption. And that's something, so we still have corruption, but I really see, from the figures and actually what we hear, it's smaller than we had before. It's still there, but there is an intention to fight it. And another issue on regulation, just small one, just to add what Olena said, it's, for example, what helped us to develop Miltech. We don't have really strong regulation there. That, for example, in European Union, you have to come up with R&D, you have to test it for 2 years, and then you only can put it into the production or something like that. In Ukraine, we don't have this kind of possibility to be so long in the processes, and therefore we have really simplified regulation there. And actually testing is really possible, especially for drones. They go immediately to the front line and the guys are testing. I think it's the best test which is possible. And therefore, there is a kind of really good interlink between people in the army and those producers of the drones, because innovation there is just really fast. And actually, that's the only way how you can actually survive. The only what Ukraine needs is to scale up all this. And for this, we really need financing. And that's where we come back to our international partners and other countries that help us, that we need kind of scaling up. And for this, we need financing and we need procurements of what is produced in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Oleksandra. I really wanted to go on another round of questions. Unless there is a burning question, I'm going to try to bring us to the closure. No, I don't see hands. Perfect. Thank you. So maybe concluding remarks before I sum it all up. Olena, anything that you like to leave us with?
Maybe my key word for this session, for this discussion, would be flexibility and adaptability and creativity. This is what all of us should now take as a everyday in our everyday life. And we talk not only about Ukrainians who survived during the war, but also about countries and also about the international financial institutions. So in so much changing world, we need to be so much flexible, and we have to adapt much more faster, which means that our procedures should be much more flexible. We have to be much more country specific. We have to be much more open for changes. I will probably stop here. Yeah, thanks.
I agree on the creativity, and that's what I was saying several times to our European Commission guys. I mean, like but we have meeting. Actually, yeah, Ukraine is creative, and actually we see this already from European Commission side, and I think that some IFI is becoming creative as well. Why creative is that sometimes I mean, like new decisions are coming now faster again because there is an urgency and uncertainty. Also, one important statement, and I think that everybody understands this more or less now, but still, Ukraine is not a charity case. It's really kind of opportunity to learn from and opportunity to help to contribute and receive a good, secure place. I mean, like in the I mean, like country, and that's why actually we really need I mean, like still much of the support from our international partners. I mean, like, and here we talk about financial, we talk about energy equipment, we talk about air protection, military support, we talk about other things like innovations as well. And this is kind of broad one is really important, but also what we need is kind of that all our international partners keep sanctions against Russia because we really need to dissolve Russia in order to have really secure place.
So there is this old saying that necessity is the mother of creativity and innovation. So in order for us to have that significant flexibility, adaptability, creativity in international financial institution, that has to become a necessity. And for it to become a necessity, it is the governance system of the international financial institution has to be unequivocal about the expectation for this. And because institutions respond to what is set out for them as guardrails and paths. So I think it's extremely valuable to have brave Ukrainians willing to not only survive, create opportunities, help defend and protect others and neighbors, and even offering to share knowledge, share lessons with others around the world who may face these kind of times of necessity. And it is important for international partners to be willing to take risks and to have an authorizing environment which allows them to make risks and be explicit about it. We have seen time and again that if the enabling environment is there, like even in the last few years, between the day I joined IFC and when I left, the authorizing environment changed significantly in a way that authorizes greater investment-friendly risk-taking. And that has been very well responded to throughout the institution. So it is feasible and it requires strong will from the governance of the IFIs.
Thank you so much. What a rich discussion, and thank you so much for making me to be part of it as well. I really, really highly appreciate. The objective of this session was really to take a stab at imagining the future where stability is not given anymore, and understanding what does it mean to be resilient in that context that is not stable economy. And I think that we achieved, at least scratched the surface, if I can put it that way, from very low level to up to the level of the international financial institutions to set out some of the important tools and potential areas of using those tools for specific contexts. And I think that this has been a great conversation for that. Thank you very much. I hope that because we recorded the session, we can also make something of it in terms of the write-ups potentially. And then, Olena, you were talking about potentially doing the study. So there's some ideas that potentially we could take from these sessions as well. Meanwhile, thank you very much for coming and to be continued. Thank you.